The bitter winter night in Denver, Colorado, wrapped the city in an eerie silence, broken only by the whistling wind that swept through the towering buildings. The streets lay deserted under a thick blanket of snow, reflecting the distant glow of streetlights like scattered diamonds. Emily Matthews hurried through the empty streets, her thoughts focused on reaching her warm apartment after another long day at the animal shelter where she worked as a veterinary technician. Her routine was always the same. Wake up, go to work, come home to her empty apartment, repeat. At 32, Emily had gotten used to the solitude, convincing herself that her work with animals filled the void in her life. But deep down, she yearned for something more, something meaningful that would break the monotony of her carefully structured existence. That night, fate had other plans. As Emily passed by a narrow alley, something caught her eye, a dark shape barely visible against the white snow. She might have walked past it if not for a subtle movement, a slight tremor that made her stop in her tracks. Drawing closer, her heart nearly stopped as she made out the form of a German shepherd, its once magnificent coat now matted and dirty, its body thin and trembling. The dog wore a worn collar, its tag so scratched that any identification was impossible to read. As Emily knelt beside him, she noticed his eyes, deep brown pools that held such profound sadness, it made her chest ache. Despite his weakened state, there was something noble about him, something that spoke of a past life far different from his current circumstance. "Hey there, buddy," she whispered, slowly removing her scarf to wrap around the shivering animal. The dog didn't resist her touch. He barely had the strength to lift his head. Without hesitation, Emily gathered him in her arms, surprised by how light he felt. Her car was just around the corner, and she knew the emergency veterinary clinic was only a few blocks away. At the clinic, Dr. Sarah Chen, Emily's colleague and friend, examined the dog thoroughly. "He's severely malnourished and hypothermic," she reported, her face grave. "But look at this." She pointed to a small mark on his ear. "This is a breeder's mark. This dog came from somewhere specific, Emily. He's no ordinary stray." As they warmed him up and started treatment, Emily noticed something else, the dog's reaction to certain sounds. When a car backfired outside, he trembled violently. When one of the male technicians entered wearing a dark uniform, the dog pressed himself against the wall, his eyes wide with fear. "I want to foster him," Emily declared, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "At least until we can figure out where he came from." Dr. Chen agreed, knowing Emily's experience with traumatized animals made her the perfect candidate. That first night in Emily's apartment, she named him Cooper. The name just came to her as she watched him carefully explore his new environment, his movements still weak but determined. He checked every corner, every possible exit, behaving more like a prisoner mapping an escape route than a dog exploring a new home. Emily set up a comfortable bed for him in her living room, but Cooper chose to position himself near the front door, his body tense and alert despite his exhaustion. When she tried to coax him to a more comfortable spot, he refused to move, his eyes fixed on the door as if expecting someone or something to burst through at any moment. As Emily prepared for bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that Cooper's appearance in her life wasn't just a random occurrence. There was something about his behavior, about the way he carried himself, that hinted at a larger mystery. What had happened to this noble animal? Why was he alone in that alley? And why did he seem so haunted by his past? Little did Emily know that finding Cooper was just the beginning. In the days to come, their lives would become intertwined in ways she never could have imagined, leading them both down a path that would reveal secrets long buried and challenge everything she thought she knew about trust, courage, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. As days turned into weeks, Emily watched Cooper slowly regain his strength. His physical wounds began to heal under her careful attention, but the psychological scars ran deeper than she could have imagined. Every morning, she found him in the exact same spot by the door, his eyes alert and watchful, as if he hadn't slept at all during the night. One particular morning, while preparing for their daily walk, Emily noticed something that made her pause. As she reached for Cooper's new leash, a dark sedan drove slowly past her apartment building, the driver's face obscured behind tinted windows. It might have been nothing, but Cooper's reaction told a different story. His entire body went rigid, and a low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his chest. At work that day, Emily couldn't shake off her unease. During her lunch break, she decided to dig deeper into Cooper's past. The breeder's mark on his ear had been bothering her, and with Dr. Chen's help, she began researching local German Shepherd breeders. The search led them to an old newspaper article about a prestigious breeding facility called Elite Guard Dogs that had suddenly closed its doors 18 months ago. "Look at this," Dr. Chen pointed to a photograph accompanying the article. Among the facility's prize-winning dogs was a German Shepherd that bore a striking resemblance to Cooper. The caption read, "Champion Bloodline, Atlas Top Security Dog Prospect." The dog in the picture stood proud and strong, nothing like the trembling creature Emily had found in the snow, yet the distinctive mark on his ear was identical. That evening, Emily took Cooper for their usual walk, but this time with a purpose. She deliberately passed by different types of buildings, watching his reactions. Cooper remained calm near most structures. But when they approached a warehouse district, his behavior changed dramatically. He pulled against the leash, trying to move away from certain buildings, his tail tucked and ears flat against his head. Their walk was interrupted by an unexpected encounter. A man in a security guard's uniform approached them, asking if he could pet Cooper. Before Emily could respond, Cooper backed away, pressing himself against her legs, trembling violently. The guard's friendly smile faltered for a moment, replaced by something else, recognition. But just as quickly, the expression vanished. "Beautiful dog," the guard commented, his voice carefully neutral. "Reminds me of one I used to work with. They never really forget their training, do they?" He walked away before Emily could ask what he meant, leaving her with more questions than answers. Back at home, Emily received an unexpected call from the shelter where she worked. A woman had called, asking specifically about a German Shepherd found in the snow. The caller wouldn't leave her name, but mentioned something about making things right. When the shelter staff asked for more information, the woman had hung up, clearly frightened. That night, as Emily watched Cooper patrol her apartment for the 100th time, she noticed something she hadn't before. Whenever he heard sirens in the distance, he would freeze, then quickly hide in the darkest corner of the room. It wasn't just fear, it was learned behavior. Someone had trained him to react this way. Emily's mind raced with possibilities. The closed breeding facility, the mysterious guard, the anonymous call, Cooper's specific reactions to certain triggers. They were all pieces of a puzzle she was just beginning to understand. But the more she uncovered, the more she realized that finding Cooper might not have been an accident at all. A soft whimper drew her attention back to Cooper. He stood at her bedroom window, staring intently at something outside. Following his gaze, Emily spotted the same dark sedan from that morning, parked across the street. As she watched, the car's engine started, and it slowly pulled away into the night. Cooper's body remained tense long after the vehicle disappeared from view. Emily sat down beside him, gently stroking his fur. "What happened to you, Cooper?" she whispered. "What are you trying to tell me?" As if in response, Cooper pressed closer to her, his eyes never leaving the window. In that moment, Emily made a decision. Whatever secrets lay in Cooper's past, she would uncover them. Someone out there knew the truth and they were getting closer. The question was, were they friend or foe? The following day, Emily decided to take a calculated risk. During her lunch break, she drove to the address listed for the former Elite Guard Dogs facility. The building stood abandoned on the outskirts of Denver, its once pristine facade now weather-worn and neglected. Yellow "No Trespassing" signs decorated the chain-link fence surrounding the property. As Emily parked across the street, she noticed something odd. Despite the facility's apparently abandoned state, the lawn was recently mowed, and fresh tire tracks marked the gravel driveway. Someone had been here, and recently. She snapped a few photos with her phone, careful to remain in her car. The last thing she needed was to draw unwanted attention. Back at work, Emily shared her findings with Dr. Chen. "Look at these training certificates on the wall." She pointed to one of the photos she'd taken through the fence. "They specialized in security and protection dogs, but something about this doesn't add up. Why would a legitimate training facility shut down so suddenly at the height of its success?" Dr. Chen studied the images carefully. "Emily, I think I recognize this place. About a year ago, we treated several dogs that came from a facility shutdown. They were all severely traumatized, displaying similar behaviors to Cooper. But the case files were sealed, and we were told not to discuss it." The revelation sent chills down Emily's spine. That evening, as she walked Cooper around their neighborhood, she noticed he seemed more agitated than usual. His ears kept twitching at every sound, and he stayed closer to her than ever before. Then, as they rounded a corner, Cooper suddenly stopped, his whole body going rigid. Across the street stood the security guard they'd encountered earlier, talking to someone in a parked car, the same dark sedan that had been following them. The guard handed something through the window, then quickly walked away. Before Emily could process what she'd seen, Cooper tugged urgently at his leash, practically dragging her in the opposite direction. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat at her computer, digging deeper into Elite Guard Dogs' history. Most information had been scrubbed from the internet, but she found cached versions of old articles. The facility had won numerous awards for their training programs, specializing in high-end security dogs for private clients. But there were whispers in forum posts about their methods, about dogs that emerged from their program changed, broken. A notification popped up on her screen, an email from an anonymous address. Emily's heart raced as she read the message. "Not all guards are there to protect. Some watch to keep secrets. Be careful who you trust." Attached was a photo of a group of trainers standing in front of the Elite Guard Dogs facility. Among them was the security guard they'd met, looking several years younger, but unmistakable. Emily printed the photo and studied it carefully. In the background, partially visible, was a row of kennels. Through one of the kennel doors, she could make out a German shepherd that looked exactly like Cooper, proud, strong, and alert. But it was what was next to the kennel that caught her attention, a clipboard with what appeared to be a training schedule and the name Atlas clearly visible. The next morning, Emily arrived at work early, determined to find those sealed case files Dr. Chen had mentioned. As she searched through the clinic's archived records, she found something unexpected. A USB drive taped to the back of an old filing cabinet, labeled simply EGD Files. With trembling hands, Emily plugged the drive into her computer. It contained dozens of documents, but before she could read them, she heard footsteps approaching. Quickly pocketing the drive, she turned to find the clinic's new janitor standing in the doorway, watching her with an unsettling intensity. He was holding a mop, but his hands were too steady, too professional for someone who cleaned floors for a living. "Early start today?" he asked, his voice casual, but his eyes sharp and assessing. "Just catching up on some paperwork," Emily replied, trying to keep her voice steady. As she walked past him, she could have sworn she saw him reach for his phone. That evening, as Emily sat on her couch with Cooper's head in her lap, She realized she was now part of something much bigger than just saving a dog from the snow. The USB drive felt heavy in her pocket, its contents potentially holding answers to questions she hadn't even thought to ask yet. But one thing was becoming clear. Cooper wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He was a key player in a story that someone desperately wanted to keep buried. That night, after triple checking that her apartment doors were locked, Emily sat at her kitchen table with Cooper vigilantly by her side. Her hands trembled slightly as she inserted the USB drive into her laptop. The files began to load, revealing a disturbing truth about elite guard dogs that went far beyond simple training practices. The documents detailed an operation that had started as a legitimate security dog training facility, but had evolved into something far more sinister. Under the guise of advanced training techniques, they had been conditioning dogs for extreme situations, pushing them far beyond ethical boundaries. The facility's special program included isolation tactics, sleep deprivation, and psychological manipulation, all designed to create dogs that would follow commands without question. Emily's eyes welled with tears as she read through training logs labeled Atlas, Cooper's former name. The entries documented his progression from a promising security prospect to what they termed a prime asset. But unlike the other dogs, Atlas had shown unusual resistance to their conditioning methods. The final entry noted him as unsuitable for program completion due to his persistent independence and failure to submit to advanced protocols. A soft whimper drew her attention to Cooper, who had pressed himself against her leg, as if sensing her distress. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, marveling at his resilience. "You never broke, did you, boy? You stayed true to yourself despite everything." The files also contained personnel records, including one for Thomas Morgan, the security guard they'd encountered. According to his file, he had been a senior trainer at Elite Guard Dogs, but had filed several internal complaints about the facility's practices before its sudden closure. The last document mentioning him was a termination notice dated just days before the facility shut down. A series of emails caught her attention. They were exchanges between the facility's management and various private security firms discussing specialized training services that went well beyond normal security dog preparation. The language was carefully coded, but the implications were clear. They were training dogs for purposes that crossed ethical and legal boundaries. As Emily dug deeper into the files, she found something that made her blood run cold. There was a list of clients, powerful individuals and organizations who had commissioned specially trained dogs. But more disturbing were the notes about asset recovery, systematic efforts to reclaim dogs that had been part of their program even years after they'd left the facility. A sudden noise outside made both Emily and Cooper jump. Through her kitchen window, she caught a glimpse of movement in the parking lot below. The same dark sedan from before was there, but this time it wasn't alone. A van had parked beside it, its windows tinted, its engine still running. Emily quickly powered down her laptop and moved away from the window, her heart pounding. Cooper stood alert, his body tense but no longer trembling with fear. Instead, he positioned himself between Emily and the door, his posture protective rather than fearful. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You have something that doesn't belong to you. Both the dog and the drive. A simple exchange can end this quietly." Emily's mind raced. The USB drive hadn't been forgotten or misplaced. It had been planted for someone to find. But why? And by whom? The answer came in the form of another text, this one from a different number. "Don't trust the first message. TM. Meet tomorrow, 10 a.m., Carter Park. Bring the dog. Time to end this. TM. Thomas Morgan, the former trainer." Was he trying to help, or was this another trap? Emily looked at Cooper, who met her gaze with steady eyes. He was no longer the broken creature she'd found in the snow. Despite his traumatic past, or perhaps because of it, he had found his strength again. Emily made her decision. Running wasn't an option, not anymore. Whatever secrets Elite Guard Dogs was trying to protect, whatever truth Thomas Morgan wanted to reveal, tomorrow would bring answers. But first, she needed to ensure those files wouldn't be lost. With steady hands, she began uploading the contents of the USB drive to a secure cloud account, knowing that soon all the pieces would finally come together. The morning dawned crisp and clear, the sun casting long shadows across Carter Park. Emily arrived early, her heart thundering in her chest as she scanned the nearly empty park. Cooper walked confidently beside her, his demeanor remarkably different from the frightened dog she'd rescued weeks ago. Dr. Chen had insisted on being nearby as backup, positioning herself at a cafe across the street with a clear view of the park. They had already uploaded all the USB files to multiple secure locations and informed trusted colleagues about their situation, a precaution that felt necessary given the stakes involved. At precisely 10 a.m., Thomas Morgan emerged from behind the park's community center. He was dressed in civilian clothes now, all traces of the security guard persona gone. Cooper's reaction surprised Emily. Instead of fear, he showed recognition, his tail giving a slight wag. "He remembers me," Thomas said softly, keeping his distance. "I was different back then, one of the few who actually cared about the dog's well-being." He pulled out his phone, showing Emily his badge from Elite Guard Dogs. "I was their head trainer before I discovered what they were really doing." Emily kept one hand on Cooper's leash, the other gripping her phone. "The files on the USB drive," she began. "You left them for someone to find, didn't you?" Thomas nodded. "I've been trying to expose them for months. When I saw Cooper, Atlas, that day with you, I knew it was finally time. He was special, you know, the only dog who completely resisted their advanced conditioning program." As they talked, Thomas revealed the full scope of Elite Guard Dogs' operation. The facility had started legitimately, but had been approached by private military contractors seeking dogs for questionable purposes. The special program had been designed to break dogs down completely, rebuilding them as tools rather than living beings. Atlas was their prime candidate, intelligent, strong, perfectly trained. But he had something they couldn't break: empathy. No matter what they did, he wouldn't abandon his natural instinct to protect and care. Thomas's voice cracked slightly. "The night before they planned to implement their final protocol, I helped him escape. I couldn't save all of them, but I could save him." Emily's mind raced as the pieces fell into place. Cooper's fear of uniforms, his protective instincts, his resistance to entering small spaces. But why are they still looking for him? "It's been months." "Because he's evidence," Thomas explained, pulling out a small recording device. During his training, Atlas was present for every major meeting, every illegal transaction. They thought dogs were safe witnesses. Who would suspect? But I had been recording everything through his specialized collar. Every conversation, every deal, every illegal order. A sudden gust of wind rustled the trees, making both Emily and Cooper alert. Thomas quickly continued. "The recordings are encrypted, tied to Atlas's specific vitals through his chip. That's why they need him back. Without him, the evidence is useless. They've been searching for months, trying to find him and eliminate any traces of their operation." Emily watched as Cooper moved closer to Thomas, allowing the former trainer to gently pat his head. "That night in the snow," she began, "was he really lost, or—" "I've been watching over him from a distance," Thomas admitted. "When I saw him take shelter in that alley, I knew I had to find someone trustworthy to help him. I'd been monitoring you for weeks, your work at the shelter, your dedication to animals. When you found him, I knew he'd be safe." The sound of approaching footsteps made them all turn. Dr. Chen was walking briskly toward them, her face tense. "Emily, we've got company." Two black SUVs just pulled up on the north side of the park. Thomas straightened up, his expression hardening. "They must have tracked me. We need to move, now." He handed Emily a small device, barely larger than a USB drive. "This contains everything. The recordings, the evidence, all of it. Take Cooper and go to the police." "I'll hold them off." Emily clutched the device, looking between Thomas and Cooper. The dog stood tall, no longer showing any signs of his previous trauma. In his eyes, she saw not fear, but determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together. 2 months later, Emily sat on her porch, watching Cooper chase butterflies in her newly fenced backyard. The morning sun caught his healthy coat, now gleaming and full. He was a different dog from the broken creature she'd found in the snow, confident, playful, and completely at peace. The evidence Thomas had provided proved invaluable. The encrypted recordings from Cooper's specialized collar had exposed the entire operation. Elite Guard Dog's illegal training program had been shut down permanently, its top executives facing serious legal consequences. The investigation had led to the rescue of dozens of other dogs from similar facilities across the country. Thomas had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, his early attempts to stop the program, and his role in saving Cooper working in his favor. He now worked with a legitimate organization that rehabilitated former service dogs, using his expertise to help them transition to civilian life. Emily smiled, remembering the day they'd presented their evidence to the authorities. Cooper had walked into the police station like he owned it, no longer afraid of uniforms or confined spaces. The technicians had been amazed by the sophistication of his special collar, a testament to both the organization's technical capabilities and their ultimate downfall. The best security system turned out to be the one with a conscience, Detective Martinez had commented while reviewing the evidence. The recordings had revealed not just the illegal training operations, but also connections to various corporate espionage schemes. Cooper had been present during countless illegal transactions and meetings, his enhanced collar capturing everything. Dr. Chen had been instrumental in helping other rescued dogs, creating a specialized rehabilitation program based on what they'd learned from Cooper's recovery. The shelter where Emily worked had become a safe haven for these animals, giving them a chance to recover and find loving homes. The sound of a car pulling up brought Emily back to the present. Cooper's ears perked up, but his tail started wagging as he recognized the visitor. Thomas stepped out, carrying a bag of Cooper's favorite treats. "How's our hero doing?" he asked, watching Cooper bound over to greet him. "Living his best life," Emily replied, smiling. "The nightmares have stopped completely. He actually sleeps through the night now." Thomas nodded, his eyes misty. "You know, in all my years of training dogs, I've never seen one quite like him. He didn't just survive, he showed us all what real strength looks like." Cooper had become something of a local celebrity. His story, carefully sanitized for public consumption, had inspired changes in dog training regulations nationwide. More importantly, it had sparked a movement to protect working dogs' rights and welfare. Emily watched as Cooper showed off his new toy to Thomas, playing with the pure joy that only a truly happy dog could express. The investigation was over, the bad guys were facing justice, and the future looked bright. But the greatest victory wasn't in the criminal charges or policy changes. It was in the simple sight of Cooper living without fear, being just a dog, loved and protected. "You know what amazes me most?" Emily said, joining them in the yard. "He never lost his ability to trust. After everything he went through, he still believed in the goodness of people." Thomas tossed Cooper's toy, watching him dash after it. "That's why they couldn't break him. Real strength isn't about being tough or aggressive. It's about keeping your heart open, even when the world gives you every reason to close it." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Emily reflected on how a single act of kindness on a snowy night had sparked a chain of events that changed so many lives. Cooper had taught her that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come not from being fearless, but from facing your fears and choosing to trust again. Cooper returned with his toy, dropping it at Emily's feet and looking up at her with those soulful eyes. Eyes that now sparkled with joy instead of fear. She knelt down, wrapping her arms around him as he nuzzled into her embrace. They had both found something they didn't know they were looking for, a second chance, a new family, and the courage to trust in love again. The end. Dear listeners, we hope Cooper and Emily's story has touched your heart as much as it has touched ours. Their journey reminds us that every act of kindness can spark a chain of events that changes lives forever. For more inspiring stories about the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, subscribe to our channel and click the like button. We've created a special playlist featuring similar tales of hope and courage. You'll find it in the link to your left. Share your own rescue stories in the comments below, and don't forget to join our community of animal lovers. Together, we can make a difference, one story at a time. See you in our next adventure.